If the words familiar spirit in Isaiah 29 verse 4 refer to the Book of Mormon, why do familiar spirits always refer to occult practices such as channeling and necromancy everywhere else in the Old Testament?
Question 10. If the words familiar spirit in Isaiah chapter 29 verse 4 refer to the Book of Mormon, why do familiar spirits always refer to occult practices such as channeling and necromancy everywhere else in the Old Testament? So let us ask another question. Why does Christ refer to the church as leaven when all other references to leaven in the New Testament refer to corruption? For instance, we read in Matthew chapter 13 verse 33, he says, "Another parable spake he unto them, the kingdom of heaven is like unto leaven, which a woman took and hid in 3 measures of meal till the whole was leavened." And this parable is repeated again in Luke chapter 13 verse 21. So this compares the church of God, the kingdom of God, to leaven. And yet, in Matthew 16 verse 6, as well as verses 11 through 12, and then in Mark chapter 8:15 and Luke chapter 12:1, he warns his disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees. And Paul, writing to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, verses 6 through 8, and writing to the Galatians chapter 5, verse 9, he compares false doctrines to leaven, and how the false doctrines, if allowed, can spread and corrupt the entire church. So why did Christ, in one instance, use leaven to represent the kingdom of God, and in other instances used it to represent the false doctrines of the Pharisees? Now the question speaks of Isaiah chapter 29 verse 4, which is a similar case. That verse says, "And thou shalt be wrought down, and shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust." Now, we take a look at this. It is true. This is the only verse that I can find in the Old Testament that uses the phrase familiar spirit in reference to anything other than occult practices. But as we see with the example of the leaven, just because it is used in one way, primarily, does not mean it cannot be used in another way. And in this particular example, he doesn't say that it will be a familiar spirit, but that their voice will be as of one that hath a familiar spirit. So he's making a simile here. He is drawing a comparison. Just as one who speaks with a familiar spirit in their occult practices speaks or pretends to speak for the dead who are in the dust, so the Book of Mormon, in a very similar manner, speaks for the dead who are, buried in the ground. So, what Isaiah is doing here is taking a familiar practice and likening it to what will happen in the future. It is a symbolism that would be readily recognized by the ancient Israelites, just as the leaven is readily recognized. And it can be used in multiple ways, some good, or some to represent good, and others to represent bad.